Your driveway is encroaching on community land, and we are going to need you to move it." That was Lorna Vance, president of the Cedar Hollow Homeowners Association, standing at the foot of my gravel drive on a Tuesday morning, with a clipboard against her hip and a measuring wheel in one hand, telling me that the strip of crushed stone my late wife and I had laid by hand belonged to her. The driveway in question was 41 feet of compacted gravel, running from my garage to the county road, and it sat on land my family had owned since before Cedar Hollow had a name. What Lorna did not know, what she never once thought to check in the 18 months she spent finding me, was that the road her precious community connected to was not the county's at all. It was a private easement. And I was about to find out who actually held the deed to it. If you owned the only legal way in and out of 140 homes, and the woman trying to take your driveway had no idea, what would you have done? My name is Ray Holt. I am 62 years old, and for 34 of those years, I worked as a land surveyor for the County Roads Department before I retired and went private. I know the difference between a recorded right-of-way and a neighborly habit the way a carpenter knows a load-bearing wall. A right-of-way is a thing somebody wrote down, witnessed, stamped, and filed in a vault where it will outlive everyone who signed it. A neighborly habit is a thing people do until they stop. Half the property disputes I ever surveyed came down to somebody mistaking the second one for the first. They had mowed a strip for 30 years and decided that made it theirs. They had driven across a field since they were boys and could not imagine a deed that said otherwise. I spent my whole career standing in those fields with a transit and a steel tape, telling people, as gently as I could, where the lines actually fell. So I knew the way you know your own hands, that what a thing looks like on the ground and what it says on paper are two different countries, and that paper wins. My place sits on 11 acres at the high end of a valley in the foothills, a parcel my grandfather bought in 1946 with money he saved welding ship hulls during the war. He paid cash. He used to say that land was the only thing a man could buy that the bank could not move while he slept. The deed he signed is recorded in Book 41 of the county records, and I have read it more times than I can count, because reading deeds is what I did for a living, and because this one is mine. The house I live in now, my wife Dana and I built with our own hands across 2 summers on the footprint of the old cabin my grandfather raised. We framed it ourselves. We wired half of it ourselves and hired out the rest. Dana laid the tile in the kitchen on her knees over the course of a week, and there is one tile in the corner by the stove that is a 1/4 inch off square because the baby kicked while she was setting it, and she laughed so hard she lost her line. We never fixed it. She passed 4 years ago in the spring. And that crooked tile is one of 100 small things in that house that still has her hands in it. Our daughter Tess, who is 17, still lives with me, and most mornings she walks the dog down the drive to the mailbox before school. The dog is a blue heeler named Scout, who thinks the mailbox is the edge of the known world. That gravel they wanted me to tear up was not a code violation to me. It was the last thing Dana and I poured together. The autumn before she got sick, the 2 of us raking crushed stone level in the cold until our hands went numb. And it was the path my daughter walked every single morning of her life. A woman in white sneakers wanted me to dig it up because it offended her sense of aesthetic harmony. Cedar Hollow came later. The development went in across the lower valley about 12 years back. 140 homes on what used to be the Pruitt Ranch, with curving streets and a stone entrance sign and an HOA that took itself very seriously. My property was never part of it. My deed predates the subdivision plat by 66 years. Cedar Hollow had one problem. Its glossy brochure never mentioned, though. And it was a problem I understood the first day they broke ground, because I had surveyed that ground myself, years earlier for a different client. The only paved access to the entire development ran across a 40-foot strip of private land, not county land. Private. And the road my driveway connected to, the one Lorna Vance kept calling community property, was the very strip everyone in Cedar Hollow drove over every single day to get home. I did not say any of that to Lorna the morning she showed up with her measuring wheel. I have learned that the people who most want to be argued with are the ones you should never argue with. I just listened. "This gravel extends 3 feet past your property line," she said, rolling the wheel up my drive in her white sneakers, the hem of a linen blazer catching the breeze. 3 feet onto land the association maintains. We have an aesthetic standard, Mr. Holt, and unpermitted surfaces are a violation of it. I asked her which land. Exactly, the association maintained. All of it, she said, and waved the clipboard toward the county road like she was blessing it. Everything from the entrance up. It's functionally part of our jurisdiction. Functionally. I remember holding on to that word. It is the word people use when the actual word legally is no. I told her my property line was where my grandfather's deed said it was, and that I would be happy to walk it with her if she brought a licensed surveyor. She smiled the way you smile at a child who has said something charming and wrong, and told me she would be sending a formal notice. Then she rolled her wheel back down my 41 feet of gravel, climbed into a white SUV with a vanity plate that read CDR HOA, and drove off down the strip of road she did not own. That afternoon, I did what I have done after every consequential conversation of my adult life. I took a legal pad, wrote the date, the time, what was said, who said it, and what I observed. Then I started a folder. I labeled it, in black marker, Cedar Hollow. I did not know yet that the folder would grow to 4 inches thick. I only knew that a woman with a clipboard had told me my own land was functionally hers. The first notice arrived 11 days later. It was printed on association letterhead with the Cedar Hollow stone entrance logo embossed at the top, and it cited a covenant article that did not apply to me because I was not a member of the association. It demanded I remove 3 feet of driveway within 30 days or face a fine of $50 per day. I read it twice. I read it a third time at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold beside me. Because in 34 years of reading legal descriptions, I had learned that the wrongness of a document is usually in the part people skim. This one cited my parcel by an address, but never by its legal description, never by book and page, never by the actual recorded boundary. It asserted an encroachment without a survey. It was a letter written by someone who had decided the answer before they checked. So, I checked. The next morning, I drove to the county recorder's office, the same building where I had filed survey plats for 3 decades, where the same long oak counter still had the same worn spot where 1,000 surveyors had set down 1,000 rolls of Mylar. The clerk behind it, a woman named Pam who had stamped half my career, waved me back to the public terminals without my even asking. I pulled the recorded plat for Cedar Hollow first. I unrolled it across the light table and ran my finger along the entrance road the way I would on any job, looking not at what the developer wanted you to see, but at the dedication block in the corner, the little paragraph of fine print that tells you who gave what to whom. And there it was, or rather, there it was not. The streets inside the subdivision had been dedicated to the county. The entrance road had not. The entrance road was drawn as a private easement across a separate 40-foot parcel with its own tax identification number. And the dedication block said, in language I had read 100 times on 100 plats, that the strip would be conveyed to the county or the association upon completion and acceptance. Upon completion and acceptance, I pulled the records on the parcel itself, next the chain of title on that 40-foot strip, and the story came up out of the screen, one document at a time. The developer had platted the subdivision and meant to deed the access strip over once the project was finished. He never finished it. The recession came, his construction loans went bad, and he filed bankruptcy with the entrance road still in the name of his holding company. The project was sold at a loss to a second outfit that built out the remaining homes but never untangled the access strip, because untangling it would have meant paying a lawyer to read the plat. And nobody pays a lawyer to read a plat for a problem they do not know they have. The holding company dissolved. The 40-foot strip, the only paved way in or out of 140 homes, became an orphan. On paper, it still belonged to a company that no longer existed, and a company that no longer exists cannot pay its taxes. I pulled my grandfather's deed last, just to hold the contrast in my own hands. Book 41, 1946. Cash. Clean. 66 years older than the plat that now claimed 3 feet of my driveway. I sat at that public terminal in the quiet of the records room, and I understood, in black and white, exactly where everyone was standing. I filed the notice in my folder. I did not respond to it. 30 days later, the fine began to run. Let me tell you something about being fined for land you own. It does not feel like an insult at first. It feels like a clerical error, the kind that gets fixed with one phone call. So I made the phone call. I called the association office, and a polite young woman told me the matter was being handled by the board, and the board's position was final. I asked to see the survey their position was based on. There was a pause, and then she said, the board did not need a survey because the encroachment was visible. I wrote that down too. No survey, visible. 2 words that would matter a great deal later. By the end of the 2nd month, the fines totaled $3,000, and a lien notice appeared in my mailbox. Tess found it. She was 16 then, and she came in from the bus and dropped her backpack by the door and went through the mail the way she always did, and I watched her stop on one envelope. The county seal was printed in the corner. She stood in the kitchen, holding it with both hands, like it might be hot, and the dog circled her ankles, and she did not even look down. "Dad," she said, "it says lien. Can they take the house?" My daughter is not a child who scares easily. When her mother was sick, Tess was the one who learned to read a medication schedule at 13 and never missed a dose. She had asked me the question in a flat, level voice, but I saw her jaw working the way Dana's used to when she was holding something back, that small muscle at the corner that gave her away every time. I pulled out a chair and told her to sit down. I told her no. I told her that a lien is a claim, not a key, and that a claim is only as good as the right behind it, and that the people who filed this one did not have the right they thought they had. She asked me what that meant, and I made a decision in that moment that I have never regretted, which was to tell my 16-year-old daughter the whole truth, because she was going to live through this fight whether I explained it or not. And a person fights better when they understand the ground. So I told her. I told her about the plat and the dedication block and the 40-foot strip that the developer never deeded over. I told her that the road everyone in Cedar Hollow drove on did not belong to Cedar Hollow, and that the woman with the clipboard had no idea. I told her that sometimes the person yelling the loudest is standing on the weakest ground, and that our job was not to yell back, because yelling is what people do when they do not have paper. Our job was to keep the paper. She listened the whole way through without interrupting, which is not like her. And when I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she got up, went to my desk, came back with the folder, and set it on the kitchen table between us. She opened it to the first page, the legal pad entry from the morning Lorna Vance rolled her measuring wheel up our drive. She read it. Then she took the lien notice out of its envelope, smoothed it flat with her hand the way her mother used to smooth a tablecloth, and slid it into the folder behind everything else. "Okay," she said. "We keep the receipts." That was the night Cedar Hollow stopped being my fight and became ours. The escalation came in a staircase, and I counted every step. The first step was the notice. The second was the fine. The third arrived on a Thursday morning in the spring, when a man in a polo shirt and a lanyard knocked on my door and announced he was an inspector. He had a clipboard of his own and a laminated badge clipped to his pocket that I could see, even from the doorway, had been printed on somebody's home machine and run through a laminating pouch you buy at the office supply store. The corners not quite square, the photo a little too bright. He told me he was there to document the encroachment for the association's legal file, and that he would need access to my property to take measurements. I asked him what agency he represented. He said the association. I asked him whether he held any inspection license or certification issued by the state or the county, the kind a real inspector carries and will show you without being asked. He looked at his clipboard as though the answer might be written on it. He did not. I told him he was welcome to stand on the public road and photograph whatever he could see from there, but that he would not be setting one boot on my 11 acres. And I closed the door, gently. The way you close a door on a salesman you do not want to embarrass. Through the front window I watched him photograph my driveway from the strip of road that, unknown to him, neither he nor the woman who sent him had any right to stand on. So I photographed him, photographing it from the window, with the date and time stamped by the phone, 2 drives, 2 copies, the way I had backed up every survey I ever shot. After action always. That was incident number 3, and I wrote it in the folder with the date and the time, and a note that the inspector carried no license and refused to name one. The fourth step was the one that told me what this was really about. A neighbor of mine, an old rancher named Cole who ran cattle on the far side of the ridge, stopped me at the feed store one afternoon while I was loading bags of mineral into the truck bed. Cole is a man of few words, and most of them are about weather or cattle. So when he leaned on my tailgate and asked if I'd heard about the resort, I set the bag down and listened. He told me that Lorna Vance's husband, a developer named Garrett Vance, had been buying up the parcels at the top of the valley, the steep ground above my place, quiet purchases through a limited liability company. That Cole only knew about because Garrett had tried to buy a strip of Cole's grazing lease too. Garrett was pitching the county on a luxury resort, Cole said. A lodge and 40 cabins, a spa, a restaurant, the whole glossy picture, and he had shown it around at a chamber lunch with renderings on an easel. I asked Cole about the access. A resort at the top of that valley has exactly one buildable approach, because the grade everywhere else is too steep to pave, and I had surveyed that ground years before and knew it the way I knew my own drive. Cole told me the renderings showed a widened, improved approach road running up through the lower valley, through Cedar Hollow, and across the access strip that fed the development. I stood there in the feed store parking lot with the diesel pumps ticking behind me and felt the whole thing rotate into focus like a transit coming level. To build his resort, Garrett Vance needed that access road widened and improved. To widen it, he needed to control the land under it. And the land under it was the orphaned 40-foot strip that nobody had read the deed on in 12 years. The easiest, cheapest, quietest way for Garrett to establish control over a road nobody seemed to own was to have his wife's association start treating the entire corridor, including the road and my driveway and the 3 disputed feet of gravel, as community property. One fine at a time, one notice at a time. Build a paper record that the association had maintained and controlled the corridor for years, and by the time anyone asked the hard question, possession would look 9/10 of the law. The clipboard was not the point. The clipboard was the cover. I thanked Cole, I drove home, and I sat in the truck in my own driveway for a while with the engine off, listening to it tick the way the diesel pumps had ticked. The petty fines were not petty. They were the opening moves of a land grab worth millions of dollars, dressed up as a dispute about the color of my gravel. I went inside and I added a new tab to the front of the folder, and I wrote one word on it in the same black marker. Motive. I want to be clear that I never raised my voice through any of this. People ask me later how I stayed calm, and the honest answer is that calm is cheaper than anger, and it lasts a great deal longer. Anger spends itself in an afternoon. A folder keeps working while you sleep. Every time the association did something, I filed it. When they sent a second inspector, a different man with a different homemade badge, I filed it, and I photographed his vehicle and wrote down the plate. When they wrote a letter to the county, claiming my driveway created a drainage hazard that threatened the development below, I requested a copy of that letter under the public records law, and when it came, I read it and saw that it was signed by Lorna Vance and cited no engineer, no study, no measurement. Because a drainage hazard is exactly the kind of thing you invent when you want the county to take an interest in a road you are trying to control. I had a deputy out once, a young man named Briggs, after Lorna called the sheriff's office to report that I was operating an illegal commercial gravel pit on my property. There is no gravel pit. There is a driveway, a garage, a basketball hoop bolted over the garage door, and a blue heeler. Deputy Briggs walked the length of the drive with me, looked at all of it, looked at Tessa's hoop and the dog and the chalk a neighbor kid had left on the apron, and told me, almost apologetically, that when somebody files a complaint, the office has to roll on it regardless of how it looks on arrival. I told him I understood completely, that I had spent my own career working for the county and knew how a complaint becomes a duty, and that I appreciated him doing his job the right way. I asked him to note in his report that he had observed no commercial activity of any kind. He said he would. I asked politely for a copy. He gave me the incident number and told me how to request the report. I wrote the number on my legal pad before he was back in his vehicle, and the next morning I requested the report. And when it came, I filed it. Briggs told me something before he left that I have thought about many times since. He stood by his door with his hat in his hand and said, "Mr. Holt, the way these things work, one complaint is nothing. People call on their neighbors over dogs and fences all day long. But if a pattern builds, if it starts to look like somebody's using this office to harass a man on his own land, that's a different file. And that one has teeth." He did not tell me what to do. He told me what the threshold was, the way a man tells you the water is cold, without telling you whether to swim. Build the pattern. Keep the dates. Let them dig it themselves, one shovelful at a time, and do not stop them, because every shovelful is evidence. I shook his hand and went inside and opened my folder, which by then held 9 separate incidents, each one dated, each one witnessed or photographed, each one filed the same day it happened, and I understood that the most useful thing I could do was nothing dramatic at all. Just keep standing where the paper said I could stand, and keep writing down what they did about it. That was the spring. The fines crossed $9,000 on paper money. The association had no way to collect. That was also the spring I went quiet and started buying. Here is the thing about an orphan parcel of land: it still owes taxes. The county does not care that the owner has dissolved, or that everybody assumes the road is public. The assessor sends a bill to the last name of record every year, and every year that bill goes unpaid, and the penalties stack. And after enough years of that, the county does the only thing it can do, which is put the parcel up at a tax sale to recover what it is owed. I knew this because I had spent 34 years around county land records and watched it happen to other orphan strips, the leftover slivers and abandoned alleys. Nobody claims. I knew which clerk kept the delinquent list, and I knew how to read it. So one afternoon I went down to the treasurer's office and asked Pam's counterpart at the tax window for the current delinquent rolls, which are public. And I ran my finger down the parcel numbers until I found the one I already had memorized from the plat. The access strip into Cedar Hollow. The road Lorna Vance kept calling community property. The road Garrett Vance needed for his resort. It had been sitting on the delinquent rolls for 6 years, accumulating penalties, scheduled for the next tax sale, and not one person in 140 homes had ever noticed, because not one person in 140 homes had ever read the plat. They all assumed the county owned the road, the way you assume the floor will hold you. When you get out of bed, you do not check. Why would you check? I checked. And on a cold morning in October, at a tax sale held in the basement of the county building with maybe 11 people and folding metal chairs and a clerk reading parcel numbers off a list in a flat voice, I sat in the back with my hands in my coat pockets and waited for my number. When it came, the bidding was nothing, because nobody else in that room knew what the strip was. To them, it was a 40-foot sliver of dirt with a confusing legal description. To me, it was the only paved way in or out of a luxury resort. I bought the road that Cedar Hollow connects to for $9,400, and the back taxes owed, and I signed the paperwork on the same kind of oak counter where I had filed plats for 30 years. The deed was recorded the following week. My name went onto it in the same recorder's office where my grandfather's deed had sat for 78 years, 2 books apart on the same shelf. I now legally owned the only paved access to 140 homes and to the resort Garrett Vance was quietly trying to build, and I had paid less for it than the association had tried to fine me. I told no one but Tess. She read the recorded deed at the kitchen table. Slowly, and when she got to the legal description, she looked up at me and said, "Dad, they drive on this every day." I told her, yes. She asked if I was going to put up a gate. I told her no. I was not going to do anything at all, except keep filing. Because the thing about owning the road was not that it gave me a weapon. It was that it made everything Lorna Vance had said and done for the past 18 months provably false. On the record, in front of whoever finally asked the right question, I did not need to swing the deed like a club. I just needed her to keep talking. She kept talking. The next month, at the quarterly Cedar Hollow community meeting, which is held in the clubhouse, and which I have every right to observe because it concerns a road I now own, I sat in a folding chair, near the back, in a clean shirt, and said nothing. Lorna Vance stood at the front of the room in a magenta blazer, with a slide of my driveway projected on the wall behind her, an arrow drawn over the 3 disputed feet in red marker. She told 100 residents that the holdout owner at the top of the valley, meaning me, was endangering their property values by refusing to bring his driveway into compliance, and that the board was prepared to pursue legal action to absorb the disputed corridor into association control. She said the word absorb, and a few heads nodded, because she had spent 18 months teaching them that the corridor was theirs. A man in the third row, a younger fellow I did not know, raised his hand and asked her whether the association even had jurisdiction over land outside the platted subdivision. The room went a little quiet. Lorna smiled her charming and wrong smile, the one I had seen the first morning, and said the corridor was functionally part of the community and always had been, and that the board's attorney was confident. That was the third time I had heard her say functionally in a public setting, after the first morning on my drive and the letter to the county, and this time 40 people heard it with me on the record, in a room with a sign-in sheet. I had a recorder running in my shirt pocket, legal in this state with one-party consent, which I am. She never once mentioned that nobody on her board had read the plat, because she did not know there was anything in the plat to read. I filed that too. Date, time, place, and the word, the illegal step, the one that crossed the line cleanly, came in December. Garrett Vance was running out of patience because his resort financing depended on showing the county a controlled access road by the end of the year. So one morning, the week before Christmas, a crew of contractors arrived at the bottom of my driveway with a flatbed, a small excavator, and a set of bolt cutters, and they began to tear out the lower section of my gravel in set forms for a concrete curb that would have rerouted my drive and physically cut my property off from the road I now owned, though they had no idea. Tess was home. She called me at the job site where I was running a boundary for a client, and her voice came through in pieces. "Dad, there are men. They have a machine. They cut the chain on the lower gate, and they're digging up the driveway. There's a woman in a pink jacket telling them where to dig." I told her to go inside, lock the door, start recording from the upstairs window, and not to come out for anyone. I told her I was already in the truck. I called Deputy Briggs on the way. I told him there was an active trespass and destruction of property in progress, that I had documentation going back 18 months, and that the people doing the digging were standing on a private road that I held the recorded deed to. He met me at the bottom of my driveway 12 minutes later. What he found was this: an excavator parked across a road, owned by me, a concrete crew taking direction from Lorna Vance in her magenta blazer, a cut chain, 41 feet of my driveway with the lower 8 already torn out, and my 17-year-old daughter filming all of it from a second-story window. Briggs got out of his vehicle, took one look, and asked who was in charge. Lorna stepped forward with her clipboard and announced that the association was exercising its right to remediate an encroachment on community property. Briggs asked her to produce documentation of ownership of the land the crew was standing on. This is the part I slowed down for, because it is the part that took 18 months to arrive and 8 seconds to land. I walked to my truck. I did not hurry. I opened the folder. The 4-inch folder, labeled Cedar Hollow, in black marker, and from the front pocket, I took a single sheet of paper. It was the recorded deed to the access road stamped by the county recorder dated that October, bearing the legal description of the 40-foot strip and the name of its sole owner. I walked back. I did not hand it to Lorna. I handed it to Deputy Briggs. He read it. The whole site had gone quiet. The kind of quiet where you can hear an excavator idling and a dog barking behind a window. Briggs read it twice. Then he looked up, not at me, but at Lorna Vance, and he said, "Ma'am, this road belongs to Mr. Holt." The deed was recorded in October. Your crew was digging on his property, and you cut his chain to do it. For the first time in 18 months, nothing came out. She looked at the paper in the deputy's hand, and then she looked at the road under her own white sneakers. The road she had driven over to get there, the road she had stood in a clubhouse and called functionally hers, and I watched the word functionally die in her throat. I will give you the 2 numbers, because the numbers are the whole story. In 18 months, the association had levied $11,000 in fines against me and collected exactly 0, because they had no jurisdiction to levy a single dollar. And the road they had spent those 18 months trying to absorb, the road worth millions to the resort, I had bought at a public tax sale for $9,400, because they never once read the plat. $11,000 they could not collect, $9,400 that bought the ground out from under them. They had been standing on my answer the entire time. The consequences fell exactly where they were earned, and not 1 inch wider. Briggs ordered the crew to stop work and cited the contractor for destruction of property and trespass, and he photographed the cut chain and the torn driveway himself for his own report. The cut chain and the 8 feet of gravel they had already torn out made it a criminal matter, not a civil one. And Garrett Vance's name was on the work order the foreman handed over, because a foreman with a citation in his hand does not protect the man who hired him. Within a week, the county learned that the access road into Cedar Hollow was privately held, which meant Garrett's resort had no legal approach. And a resort with no legal way to drive to it is not a resort. It is a drawing on an easel. His financing collapsed inside the month, because a lender does not fund 40 cabins you cannot lawfully reach. The county also learned that for 12 years 140 homes had been accessed over a private road that nobody held a recorded easement on, which was a serious problem, but it was the association's problem and Garrett's problem, not mine. I am a reasonable man. The week after the dust settled, I granted every resident in Cedar Hollow a recorded access easement across my road, free and permanent, so that no family in those homes would ever have to wonder whether they could drive to their own front door. Every resident except the parcels Garrett Vance still owned at the top of the valley. Those I did not. Lorna Vance resigned as president of the Cedar Hollow Homeowners Association. The board, what was left of it, voted to dismiss the lien against me and to issue a written acknowledgement that my property had never been within association jurisdiction. I filed that acknowledgement in the folder on top of everything else. The resort was never built. The strip of land at the top of the valley that Garrett bought for it sits empty to this day, graded for an approach road that legally dead ends at a chain. I am under no obligation to open. Tess is the one who put the lower gate back up. She was the one who'd filmed the whole thing, steady as a tripod, and the footage she shot from that upstairs window is what the contractor's lawyer looked at once before advising his client to settle. She is 18 now, and she's going to study civil engineering in the fall, and she tells people her father taught her that the quietest person in the room is sometimes the only one who read the paperwork. The driveway is whole again. We repoured the lower 8 feet ourselves, the 2 of us, one Saturday in the spring, and I will tell you that mixing that concrete with my daughter felt a great deal like the summers I spent building the house with her mother. Same gravel, same hands, a generation on. Dana would have liked that. We kept it, so here is what I want you to take from this, plainly, because the story is only worth telling if it leaves you with something you can use. If someone with a clipboard tells you that your land is functionally theirs, do not argue with them. Go to the county recorder's office and pull your deed and pull theirs, and read the legal descriptions until you understand exactly where the lines fall. Walk your boundary against what the paper says. Find out who actually owns the road you drive on, because the answer is not always who everyone assumes. Keep a folder. Write the date, the time, what was said and who said it, every single time, and make 2 copies of anything that matters. Request the public records because they belong to you. The loudest authority in the room is often the one standing on the weakest ground, and the person who wins is almost never the person who shouts. It is the person who kept the receipts. If you have ever had an HOA or a board or a clipboard tell you that your own property was somehow theirs, tell me about it in the comments. I read them, and there is always someone reading who needs to hear that it can be beaten. If stories like this one are worth your time, subscribe, because I have more of them, and the people in them deserve to be heard. Next time, tell you about the retired firefighter 2 Valleys over whose HOA tried to condemn his water well as a nuisance, right up until he showed them the senior water right his great-grandfather filed in 1911, and the well that fed half the subdivision turned out to be his. Until then, read your deed, walk your line, and keep your folder close.